Hi, in this session of the tutorial, we'll be using rhythm, repetition, balance, and contrast practically in this session. Let's get started. First, this is what we have. I will do a brush explanation on how repetition, rhythm, balance, and contrast have been depicted in this composition. First, as we can see in the as we can see, we have vertical rectangles going left and right. But first, let's start with balance. The previous story I dropped on the explanation on balance, I said that balance can be in two ways, symmetrical and asymmetrical balance. Here in this composition, we can actually see a symmetrical balance, which means what we have on the part of the A is also what we have on the part of the B. And that is if we create a grid line along the paths. Let me unhide uh, the grid. So that means if we have our grid sections around vertically, we know what we have here is what we have here. So also talking about balance vertically, as in the vertical aspect of it, we notice that the balance in the vertical aspect is asymmetrical. We try to balance up the weight of all the composition here with every other element we have here. That means the typographies here are what we used here. So now let's start balance, which means we have a composition of both symmetrical and asymmetrical balance in this particular mode. And we can also try to position or reposition this element in the on the canvas in such a way that we would have majorly asymmetrical balance. That means if our element move to the edge or position it in a better way, or position it in every other way. So that is for balance. And talking about contrast, if we come to this part of the design, um, back on balance, we notice that the element we have an element here, and we also have an element. We also have an element here. Negative space that we have here is what we have here. So striking symmetry in between the whole composition. So talking about contrast, back to contrast, we notice that there is actually a gray color fill on top of the black color fill, which has a function, a use here. Now, first of all, the whole idea, the whole template, the whole layout of the design talks about, okay, justifying what we have here, 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 and here. Now, this particular section is for the brand logo or the brand icon. Then we have the imagery around the center, and we have every other typography details around the side. So I actually was thinking of, okay, what composition, what can I actually do to this side, not to make it empty, to strike a balance with the whole composition. I just decided to make a regular shape and reflected contrast. I didn't just leave this particular black section empty and it looked like it was a mistake. I tried to make it a design, you understand? So by reflecting contrast in between, and we can also understand that contrast, like I said in the previous videos, that contrast can be reflected through the use of different weights or different styles, which we have which we have here and here. So we have contrast reflecting here, we have contrast reflecting here, we have contrast present in almost all every part of the design. So I will show us how I created it, and during the course of that, I will be putting in explanations to whatever I do. So let's get started. So after creating my new document, sorry, we are using InDesign as it was outlined in the in the guide. So I'll create a regular square shape. Let me use centimeter, then create. Now, I would love to have the margin reduced. This margin is kind of too much. Margins just like we C1 is okay. Then okay. Then let me create a layout for it. I want to create a layout. The layout I'll be creating will be a layout for this and a layout for the. I'll first divide it for my balance. Now margins, create guide. So the first one, then I don't need a cutter for it, 0. Then the second one, I have a layout top and bottom, and that's for the rows and the columns. Turn on for the columns without gutter also. Then I can increase it a bit. Now I have it divided into 2 equal sections. Now that means for the symmetry aspect of it, whatever I put here should be what I'll put here. And for the asymmetrical section of it, that means whatever I put here might not be whatever I have here, but they should definitely balance visually. The weight should be equal visually. So which is what we're doing. So we'll start with, this is the layout. So we'll start with the regular shape, the shapes here, which we will do. Now let's create a shape. So click on rectangle, then I draw a rectangle, then I release it, giving it just a particular distance. Change the fill to black. Now this is just a rectangle. The size of the rectangle, let me check. You see the size of the rectangle here is 0.85 and the height is 7.925 thereabout. So then I can move and place to the center. So you can decide to zoom in. You can move and place to the center. Now this is what we want to have. Now we want to have 4 of these more on the right hand and 4 on the left hand. So which is what we are going to do right now. So just duplicate, hold on Alt, duplicate, 4. Now next thing is to reduce, reduce the edge here. You can hold on Alt to scale both opposite sides. So I'm scaling both opposite sides by holding on Alt while dragging this. Now scale this 1, then scale this also 2, scale this also 3, and finally, so after scaling this, then I'll duplicate whatever I have here. So here we're trying to create what's it called? We're trying to create repetition. We are repeating what's it called? We are repeating the same pattern, like the way it's going diagonally. We are repeating, but there's a particular system of rhythm here. There's a particular system of rhythm. First, what is rhythm? Rhythm is actually, a rhythm is a repetition or alteration of elements, often with defined intervals between them. Between them. The intervals might not be visible at all, but there is a particular repetition being depicted. So rhythm can be created in a sense of movement, just as we can see here right now, and can establish pattern and texture. There are many different kinds of rhythm, often defined by the feeling something evokes when viewed. The feeling it evokes when viewed, as we can see, the diagonalism, the slanty sides, as we can visually represent it now. It's the feeling that it's evoking. So there are different types of rhythm. We have a regular rhythm that occurs when the intervals between the elements are often the same intervals. The intervals between the elements, for example of rhythm, when in intervals between elements are the same of a regular rhythm. The intervals between this particular green is equal to this, equal to this. So we can also talk about what's it called? A flowing rhythm gives a sense of movement. A flowing rhythm gives a sense of movement. As we can see, this is also a perfect example of a flowing rhythm. It goes and comes and goes in just the same pattern, in just the same way. That's a perfect example of flowing rhythm. And we can also see this as an example of a flowing rhythm. This is a perfect example of his flowing rhythm here. We have a perfect example of flowing rhythm here. So, and we have most times flowing rhythm are organic in shape. They are always, most times they are organic in shape. So we need to know that. And finally, we have progressive rhythm that shows sequence of forms through a progression of steps, so which is a perfect example of what we have in this particular practical session. So that is that about reading and repetition, reading and repetition. So I will try to replicate or mirror. I'll try to mirror this particular one to the other hand. Select the 4, then halt and drag, put it in this position far away from it. Then I can right click, transform, then flip horizontal. Then I can try to zoom in and position it very well so that it will align. So that's it. Now we have this particular form achieved. We use rhythm to achieve this, the flow. We actually use progressive rhythm type for this. Now we can create our test, we can create every other thing. But first, let's work with a guide. Let's make half of, let's work with a uniform guide now. Let's create guide. We want to create a test, so we don't want the test to be too far or too big. So let's just go to margin, create guide, move, then don't forget to turn off this, let it be visible, turn it on. Then we can create columns. Then we can have this guide for the test. Then we can reduce it to 0. Yeah, then we can have our guide for the testing. Okay. Okay, let's use 4. 4 is good. Then, okay. And okay. So we can have our content here. We can still decide to increase the size of this by dragging. We want it to touch this end because we have a new guy, but we leave it, still doesn't really matter. We can pull it to this end and also pull it to this end just to have we can pull it like that. Then we can draw our test. So let's type repetition, then use the size of the test. Now we have this. So let's try to skew the shape. Just right click on it, then go to transform and share it. Then we'll share vertically. This is the horizontal sharing. Then we'll share vertically. Then let's see 0 from 0. Let's try to go up, 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 up. Let's see, we have 5. Okay. So now with this, can move it up with the now with this you can create the next. And let's call this reading. rhythm. So as you can see, there's no contrast between these two elements, the rhythm and the repetition. So let's try to use one of our method of contrast, which is talking about the weights. First, let's adjust the weight. Can use weight to achieve contrast, like I said. So let's reduce the weight. Let's see, change the weight to something regular. Okay. Okay, now let's reduce the size too. It looks very big. Let's reduce the size. We are getting there now. Let's see the size. So we have 51.7. So we want to reduce the size according to the golden ratio of system, or the golden ratio method I discussed in my previous video. So to do that, let's open our calculator, and we have okay. So we have the size, the test size, yes, 51.7. Let's say 51.715, but let's say 51.7. Let's go to the calculator. Let's go to our calculator and see what we have. It's 51.7 times 0.618. Now we have 31.9. That's 32. We have 32. Then we can use 32. So how did I, before I input it, how was I able to get the 0.618 that we used to multiply the initial size of what we're doing? How did I get it? So this is it. I actually, during the scaling tutorial of the previous video, I said something about ORS. To reduce, we use 161 for the golden ratio, 161.8 scaling method, and to increase. To reduce, then we use 61.8. I'll recommend you watch the golden ratio scaling method video before this particular video, so that you can get what I'm doing in this session. So now, if I have this now and I want to make sure I actually get the scale to use with this, so this is in percentage, as you can remember, because we use this is the 161.8 was in percentage. This unit also is in percent, so we want to convert it from percentage to an ordinary unit. What we'll do is 61.8 divided by 100. Then we have our 0.618, 0.618. That is what we now use to times our 51.7. Then we have 32 basically. So we use 32. Now we are working magically with golden ratio. Now this is what we have, rhythm, repetition. So we can see perfect contrast between the rhythm and the repetition. So let's go. Then we can actually duplicate this also along this line. Then balance contrast. So the same thing applies to this. So if we actually want to reduce the size, we can see that they are conflicting elements. You still need to bring this one down. So we know that the initial one was 32 pt. So we can go back to the calculator and make sure 32 pt divided by 0.618. See, using the golden ratio method. Oh, it should be times 0.61. So it will be 32 divided times 0.618 is okay. Then we have 20 basically, so we can use 20 for this, approximately 20 or we rather reduce it to 19.7 of what we have, whichever way we work. We cannot see much of a difference. So then we can actually, let's move this up a bit. So can we see a proper blend, a proper reflection of contrast in this particular? So the emphasis and the hierarchy is from repetition. From repetition. So let's continue. Let's now we're creating the next test, which will be here. Create the test area. Fill in with placeholder test. Then centralize it. So we just tried to centralize the test, or we can give it a left align, a center align, a right align, whichever one. So we just did the center align when we can. So now still on the golden ratio scaling method that we are using. We on this note we have 19.7. That was our previous, and for this let's try to use golden ratio from 19.7. Let's go to the calculator. From 19.7 times 0.618, 19.7 times 0.618, then we have 12.2, very close. So 12.2, very close to what we have. 12.2. Now that is what we have currently, and we can, so let's reduce it to some instance. So now this is actually a perfect symmetry. What we have on the right is what we have on the left. Now let's try to talk about positioning this and this, the brand logo and all of that. Create a shape. Now let's change the shape color to black. For now, we'll still be using black until we get color black, basically, until we will get to our color class. Now we can duplicate this. Let's change this font to Vera. The regular one. Well, change the regular. Then we can duplicate this to make it less for this. Now, so this is what I was trying to say, that it looks imbalanced this way. So we are trying to create something interesting that will strike a balance in this composition. So what I just did was create another shape. Was create another shape here. Then also duplicate. Then after that, I try to duplicate up again to just give it a contrasting feel. Then drag it a bit down. Then for this, I just change the color, double click, till grayish, color gray. Because like I said in the previous tutorials, that you can achieve contrast with a lighter and a darker color. So, and finally, we'll talk about the positioning of the images in between the rectangles. Open your image where your image is actually located, then drag and drop on the rectangle. And after that, you can come in between to see or locate the circle. Then you can reduce, you can see the actual image. You can use arrow to move it sideways, and or reduce it by dragging, holding shift alt to maintain the ratio. If you don't maintain the ratio with the shift alt, the image will look distorted. That means if you drag like this or you try to hold shift, it will not actually give you the quality of what you want. So you just hold on shift to maintain the ratio from the center. These are things we discussed about in the scaling classes. So we use arrow just to position the eyes. Then we can also come and drag the next image. You can drag the next image. So on and on, we'll keep dragging and positioning the images till the whole space get filled up. So, and that is that about the reading repetition class for today. Thank you.